Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. Joel Salatin, coming to us from Swoope, Virginia. Do I say that correct, Joel?
It's pronounced Swope. It looks like Swoop because it's got two O's, but it's actually pronounced Swope.
Okay, well, we understand that. So, coming to us from Swoope, Virginia, Mr. Joel Salatin. And Joel Salatin calls himself a Christian libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. Others who like him, like we do, call him the most famous farmer in the world, the high priest of the pasture, and the most eclectic thinker from Virginia since Thomas Jefferson. That was a high calling there. Those who don't like him call him a bioterrorist and a starvation advocate, and a few worse names than that. I don't think any of you are starving there, so I don't know how they apply that. But with his wife, his family, and a couple dozen enthusiastic fellow laborers, he operates Polyface Farms in Swoope, Virginia. Joel is a pioneer in and a staunch advocate of regenerative agriculture, a fancy term for producing nutritious farm products while building up the soil through innovative and proven organic methods. His farm he farms 1,450 acres, and that generates income for 22 workers. And the farm services more than 5,000 families, 10 restaurants, and 5 retail outlets with beef, pork, poultry, and forestry products. So, Joel, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out. You have a busy speaking schedule. I haven't gone into all. You've written books. You've done movies. We just rewatched The Lunatic Farmer, which is a great movie. Everyone out there should watch that. And then he runs this farm as well. So, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It is absolutely my pleasure.
So there's many things from the movie, and I think you're in more than one movie, but many points that came out in the movie that we really found significant. You made a simple distinction between chemical-based farming and carbon-based farming. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, I'd love to do that because you know uh, philosophically or philosophy is an important thing, and it's amazing how many things that when your philosophy is wrong, it's amazing how many things from a practical standpoint that you can justify when your philosophy is wrong. And so the the carbon versus the chemical approach, I'd like to back up just a moment to help everybody understand the way nature works. The way God set this planet up was the sun was the power source and grows plants. Plants through chlorophyll grow things, and they can be eaten by animals. They can obviously decay through microbes and earthworms and different things. But the way the system works, in order for something to live tomorrow, something had to die yesterday. And think about a compost pile. A compost pile is all about formerly living things. Living things go in and they get digested and decomposed, and then out the other end becomes a new tomato plant or grass or whatever.
Mhm.
And so this basic ecological, and I would even suggest spiritual concept, that something has to die in order for something to live. Something has to be sacrificed in order for new life to happen. That is a basic principle of ecology, of the way things work. So the chemical approach, the first thing I want people to understand is the chemical approach. I mean, I can argue from the chemistry and the physics and the biology, all those kind of things. But I want everybody to understand that the very first fallacy of the chemical approach to farming is that we can circumvent something has to die in order for something to live. That we can actually create life out of inert material. And so that is a glaring kind of philosophical fallacy that underpins the idea that we can grow life out of non-living and non-dying things. And so on our farm, rather than using chemical fertilizers, for example, we do a lot of composting, and the basis for composting is carbon and manure, which gives you your nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen, water, oxygen, and the correct microbes. And so we run what we call a carbon economy, so that everything that you see out here that's living is actually stimulated or fertilized or facilitated by something that did live,
Mhm.
that died, and then gave of its own energy for that next cycle.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Um, and one of the things you mentioned, first of all, I really recommend everybody to make sure they watch The Lunatic Farmer, the video. But you started out in Venezuela. Your father was farming there, and then because of political unrest and various things, your family was basically driven out, and you came to Swope, Virginia, and you came to a farm. Your father took up a farm that had been basically where the soil had been abused for a period of time. You had a lot of rocky things, hard ground, and from the look of it, just watching you walk through those lush fields, your methods have produced a major change in the biome there, the the environmental health of the farm. And maybe you can talk about, well, one of the things you mentioned is that when there is more organic matter in the soil, the soil can retain more moisture. So that's just one of the little points from your great
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, so what we've done here for 65 years is we basically had got a cheap gullied rock pile of a piece of land. It was cheap, and and started the remediation process. And Dad actually sought counsel, both public and private counsel, on how do I make a living on this little farm. And all the advice was, well, plant corn, buy chemical fertilizer, borrow money, build silos, graze the woods, those kinds of things. And because his dad had been a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine in whatever 1945. Um, Dad understood that that was not a solution, and that the chemical approach, he viewed it like a drug addiction. You've got to get stronger stuff, more toxic stuff, because nature builds up resistance. I mean, everybody's heard of superbugs created by antibiotic resistant pathogens, and so this is the way the chemicals work. Whether it's insecticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizer, it's a treadmill, and so what we began doing there in the early 60s. Now, we didn't know as much then as we know now. If we had known then what we know now, Rod, we could have probably, compressed our learning curve, our our development, our remediation curve by 50%. But we didn't know what we know now. But we knew enough to know that we needed to move the animals around. So Dad developed an electric fencing system. We knew that we needed to get organic matter on, some sort of carbon. So even as in the late 60s, we bought a used wood chipper so we could go to the woods. We had a lot of woods, had a lot of forest, and and so we'd work in the woods. We burned firewood and we'd sell firewood and different things. So you always have, dead, crooked, junky type trees in any wood lot. And so we kind of weeded that and used that as carbon. and began composting on a large scale. And then we continued to look at, well, we looked at patterns in nature. How does nature do patterns? And we saw diversity. So we made, after Dad passed away, I developed an egg mobile, a portable chicken house that followed the cows, so the chickens could scratch through the cow patties and eat out the fly larvae. Like the egret on the rhino's nose. There's a bird herbivore symbiotic relationship in nature, and and then, as we started doing a way more compost, so, well, how can we get away from all this materials handling? And so we started putting corn in it when we fed the cows in the winter. And of course, where you are in Canada, you have longer winters than we have. Uh, but the principle is exactly the same. We simply built a simple pole structure. Doesn't even have walls on it. It's just a pole structure to protect the manure and the urine that's generated in the wintertime. And we added carbon in there. We call it a carbonaceous diaper to absorb the manure and the urine. And then we added corn to it as we built it. And this bedding pack will get 4 feet deep. I mean, it gets cows are rubbing the rafters almost, by the time spring rolls around. But then we put in the pigs. The pigs then seek the fermented corn in that bedding pack and aerate it and convert it from anaerobic to aerobic compost, and then we can spread it on the fields. And so again, the animals are doing the lion's share of the work rather than us and equipment and diesel fuel, just like the eggmobile. So a lot of what we do is all about how can we harness the whatever the phenotypical distinctiveness of an animal, the phenotypical and physiological distinctiveness of an animal in order to accomplish work. I think the most important little tidbit I can share with you is for everybody to realize that 500 years ago, North America produced more food than it does today.
Hmm.
We have this idea that, oh wow, with John Deere tractors and hybrid seeds and chemical fertilizers, we're producing all this food, but that is actually not the case. There was more. Now, it wasn't all eaten by people. There were 1 to 200 million bison, 2 million wolves that needed 20 pounds of meat a day. That's 40 million pounds of meat just to the wolves, and we had passenger pigeons. The naturalist Audubon sat under a tree in about the turn of the century in 1800, and he recorded in his diary. He said, I haven't seen the sun for 3 days for the flock of passenger pigeons that blocked out the sun flying over. That's before Tyson and Cargill and Purdue and all the vertically integrated chicken farms. So the idea, and there were 200 million beavers who ate more vegetables. They're herbivores. They ate more plant material than all the people in North America today.
Wow.
So this notion that we've somehow uh, harnessed nature and whatever outsmarted nature with our intellectual capacity and our mechanical ability is it's simply not true. And so the folks who think, I've been called a starvation advocate because we all know that, compost can't compete with chemicals. Well, actually, it does. It can and it does. And the problem is that that large scale carbonaceous fertility didn't actually become, I want to say, viable, if you will, at scale until we had the infrastructure to handle the material. Front end loaders, chippers, chainsaws, those black plastic pipe to bring water, so you could get water easily. Those things were not really in place until the late 1950s, early 1960s. And so the chemical approach, which got a lot of head start from the Defense Department, from the war effort, because Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus is what you make bombs out of. And so we finished World War One, we finished World War Two, and we got all these leftover, N, P, and K. And and the question was, well, would you rather use an axe and shovel all day and shovel and shovel and shovel and shovel, or would you rather put on this little bag of stuff? So be kind of gentle on old grandpa. You and I in the same position, we might have done the same thing, especially if we lost a son in the war and a couple came back injured, the future of our farm, and we didn't have the labor. But by the mid 1960s, all of the pieces of carbon efficiency to harvest, handle it, move it, spread it. All of those things were in place by the mid 1960s. But the chemical side had a 20-year, from 1945 to 1965, had a 20-year head start, if you will.
Mm.
And the truth is that if we had had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we'd have done it without a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico, and without infertile frogs and three-legged salamanders.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, very good. So one of the points you made is in your movie is how an increase in organic matter allows the land to retain. I think you said 1% increase is a 20,000 gallons per acre retention improvement. If I got those numbers right, or
Yeah, yeah. Every 1% organic matter holds 20,000 gallons of water per acre. Every 1%. And on our farm, we've gone from 1% back in 1961 to now a little bit over 8%. So that's seven clicks of the percentage, and 7 times 20,000 is 140,000 gallons of water that we can hold today that we couldn't hold back when we came in 1961. So that's pretty amazing. And as we look at floods and droughts and different things, anomalies, we believe that one of our most important mandates, if you will, as stewards of the land, is to build forgiveness into it. And environmentalists might call it resilience. I like to call it forgiveness. I mean, the fact is that there are going to be droughts, there are going to be floods, there are going to be blizzards, there are going to be winds. All right, there are going to be these things. Nature is not always kind, and so part of our responsibility as stewards is to build forgiveness and resilience into the landscape, so that if it's dry, it doesn't dry out as fast. If it's wet, it can absorb more water and doesn't flood. If it's windy, it doesn't blow the soil away. Those kinds of things. That is part of I believe, is part of our responsibility as stewards to build that capacity into the landscape.
yeah, you use the phrase in the movie, giving God a good return on his investment. So, of course, everything we have comes from God, and without him, we can do nothing. But
Yeah.
he's the source of the sun, the water, the air, the soil, and so on. And you want, as a steward, to work all that together in the best way to give God, or to manifest fruitfulness in your labors, to accomplish something and to produce quantity, abundance. I use the word abundance quite a bit, and
Yes.
it's so encouraging to hear that.
Yeah. Well, so much of farming has this mentality, this kind of scarcity mentality, that the land or the soil, can't do what I need done. I don't have enough time to do what I need done. I mean, um, you know, not not enough permeates all of our life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not enough. It's not good enough. It's not wealthy enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not, whatever. I live in Canada, where it gets cold and we have snow all the time. We live in this place of can't or not enough or whatever. And so part of my message is wherever you live, there are lots of things you can do, even in the desert. I mean, the stuff that's been done by permaculture in, for example, the deserts of the Middle East, simply by planting some trees, putting a little funnel to catch water, so the tree gets twice as much water, like a little mini swale kind of thing. I've seen this done around the world, and it's amazing what just a little bit of literally 5 minutes with a mattock on a hillside can make the difference between a tree that dies and a tree that actually flourishes and grows. The tree starts to grow. Transpiration, evapotranspiration comes out of the leaves. The bacteria exudes, goes up into the atmosphere, and the bacteria then gives a little dot for condensation to happen, and then you got cloud formation, you have rain, and I mean you can. There are all sorts of things that can develop when we start to start to heal the land and keep a heavy vegetative cover on that land, which unfortunately doesn't happen in most crop farming. Most crop farming is a flash in the pan and then it sits fallow and there's nothing growing. And so a lion's share of the year, the soil is open and naked, not covered, and it is exposed to the elements. And that is the worst thing you can ever do for soil.
Interesting. I just ran across this morning in my devotions Psalm 84, 5 and 6. It says, "Blessed is the man," and there's a few things in there that are of a different nature, but blessed is the man who passes through the valley of Baca. And I think that is like a dry place. It says he makes it a well and the rain fills the pools. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really appropriate because we just watched your movie last night and you talked about all the ponds you have built
Yes.
on your farm and what they mean. You're getting the water for your animals from rain and not depleting the groundwater underneath.
Yeah, part of my moniker there is libertarian. I'm a small government guy, and libertarians generally don't talk about commons. They're much more interested in talking about property rights, and leave me alone, let me do whatever I want to do, versus the commons. But there's a balance here. The commons is stuff that was here before us, and should be here afterwards. The creek running through your farm. Yes, your deed says you own the property, but you didn't install that creek, and that creek was there before you came. That's part of the commons. The same thing with the aquifer under your land, and so we believe that it's part of our responsibility to increase the commons and not deplete the commons. So when you stick a straw, for example, into a body of water, and if everybody starts sucking from that body of water, there's no body of water left. The Murray-Darling River Basin, one of the largest river basins in the world in Australia, southern Australia, in 1820, ocean-going steamboats went up that Murray-Darling River 500 miles up past Adelaide, and into the interior of Australia. Today, the Murray-Darling doesn't even flow to the ocean. It just kind of turns into a little mud trickle, and there's no water. And that's because everybody pulls the water off, for irrigation. And so we believe that the key for water resilience, if you will, is to to duplicate the beavers. Again, North America had 500 years ago. North America was 8% water. Today, it's only 4% water. And even with all the, all the public works and dams and, lakes and different things that we've built, both in the U.S. and in Canada, we are at less than half the amount of surface of water that was here 500 years ago that the beavers developed. And why that is so important is because those all act like levees and protective sedimentation basins when there's a flood and heavy rain and water's running everywhere, so that the soil gets deposited soon, into a pond, as opposed to flushing all the way down to the ocean and creating problems. And so we have built a lot of ponds, and we continue to build ponds. And I expect, every time we get a little bit of cash, we build another pond, because you can never have too much water. And even with all the ponds we've built, we're not even at 1% of our farm's surface area as water yet. So we've got a long ways to go before we ever catch up with the beavers.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. Um, yeah, one of the things, well, there are a couple of, I just, there's so much information in that movie, and I know you do lectures, you travel, you speak, you conduct seminars, you've written books, and I'm sure we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here. But you mentioned about one of the ways that you and your farm have succeeded is because you have taken over some of the other functions. You mentioned production, processing, marketing, and distribution for basic things that happen between an animal being born and someone putting a steak on their plate, or a
Yes.
chicken wing on their plate. And but you mentioned, and I found this amazing. I suppose farmers listening to this may be able to relate quite easily to this. You said that a farmer generally gets about 9% of the retail value of the finished product. Is that
Yes.
that?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. In other words, what you just mentioned there, the processing. So, farmers typically are known as producers. We produce something, we grow something, but there are three basic things that happen between the farm gate and the plate, and that is processing, marketing, and distribution. Very few people want a live chicken, in their plate for dinner. They want it processed and plucked and gutted and all that. And of course, what those three areas are you know known in farming as the middleman. And if you've ever heard a farmer say, "Well, the middleman makes all the money," the middleman is the one in the middle between the farmer and the ultimate consumer. 80 years ago, at least in the US, 80 years ago, the farm gate percentage of the grocery store price was 50%. In other words, when somebody went in and bought something at the grocery store for $1, the farmer got half of it. Today, yes, it's between 8 and 9% and continuing to trend downward.
Wow.
So the farm gate share of the grocery dollar has gone so low. We could have a new farm policy from now on. Farmers don't get paid anything; they just have to work for nothing, and it would only change the price of food 9%. It's just it's crazy. But what created that? Well, what created that is two things working in tandem. One is the North American consumer has has abandoned the kitchen and is eating convenience food. 75% of the food in the U.S. at least is now convenience food. It's already cooked packaged, processed, and a lot of it is in single serving stuff, so you can just go buy, single serving pieces and be done with it. So you have that on one side, the convenience food, people wanting more processed. They're not getting whole chickens. They're getting, boneless, skinless breasts or Lunchables or chicken pot pie. On the other side, you have a proliferation of government food safety requirements that's as tall as a tall as a house now of rules and regulations that are all dealing with what that middleman does. In other words, there are very few rules and regulations on selling a cow or selling a tomato. Okay. But as soon as you make tomato soup or you make a bone broth, now suddenly you have you suddenly have to have a $500,000 permitted licensed facility. And so what's happened in these 80 years, we've got the consuming populace going for convenience, which is the one area of the food system that the government controls more than any other, and has created a plethora of rules and regulations for entry, which are scale prejudicial. In other words, it's much easier to comply if you're a big operator than a small operator. And so this scale prejudice has excluded hundreds of thousands of would-be entrepreneurial farmers from being able to access their neighbors with convenience food that the neighbors want because of these rules and regulations. And so I make no, I'm not reluctant to say that I am in favor of a food emancipation proclamation so that neighbor to neighbor food transactions can occur without asking the government's permission. Mm-hmm. I think that's a historically, certainly a historically normal. I'm not suggesting that we be able to export or go to the supermarket, but I am saying if you're my neighbor and you want to come over to our farm and get something, from raw milk to charcuterie to tomato soup, we should be able to interact in a food transaction as neighbor to neighbor in a relational respect without asking a bureaucrat's permission.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I don't know how regulations compare from Virginia to British Columbia, but I know we have pretty severe restrictions here on farm gate sales and so on.
Yes.
And that has come in, in the last maybe 20 years or so, maybe a little bit longer in our area, where farmers did used to be able to, slaughter a beef and sell pieces to their neighbors and so on. And now that is, unless they have a slaughterhouse facility that's approved, inspected, and so on, they can't do that. No.
That's right. That's right. Now, the industry pushes back on this idea, saying, "Well, we need a level playing field. If we have to comply with all these rules, then Farmer John down here, but with 2 cows, should have to comply with the same thing. We need a level playing field." But the thing is, we're not playing the same game. We're not playing the same game. The big operation, they're going into a big grocery store. Nobody knows where that animal came from. Nobody knows where that food came from. Nobody's seen it. There's no relationship whatsoever. Yeah. So for me, it's equivalent to saying, okay, we're going to level the playing field in football. Now here in the U.S., we're in football season now, and we're going to level the playing field in football. So maybe the Canadian, I should say, hockey. All right. We're going to level the playing field in hockey. So from now on, The only the only way that you can play hockey is in a certified, hockey stadium with a licensed referee. We're not going to let you play on the farm pond anymore, where a boot and we're two boots on one end and two boots on the other end are the goalposts, and the rink isn't the pond isn't as big as a licensed rink. We're not going to allow that anymore. We're going to level the playing field. So the only place you can play hockey is in a licensed facility. That would be leveling the playing field. But as you know, and I know, on the Sunday afternoon hockey pickup game in the winter on a frozen pond, there aren't the expectations, there aren't the perceptions, there's not the money, there's not the risk, there's not any of that. Where it's a totally different, yes, it's hockey, but it's a completely different context and a completely different game than when professionals play.
Yeah.
And so the same thing is true here in the food system.
Right.
Those of us who are trying to sell direct to our neighbors with a relationship, we're not in the same game
Right.
as somebody like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland and Tyson that's selling nameless, faceless in a anonymous way.
Yeah. So you had more than one experience with challenges from probably I don't know if they were food inspectors, but
Yes.
people who came to your farm and were concerned about you uh, s- selling prepared
Yes.
poultry meat
Yes. Yes.
and other things. And maybe you can tell folks about that because you survived that. And the difference in the bacteriological or the bacteria count in between your chickens and the store-bought chickens. Maybe you can flesh that out for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were processing chickens, to show you how naive I was when I was younger. The thought that we couldn't sell a chicken that we butchered to a neighbor exercising voluntary freedom of choice, uh, to give their microbiome agency. The thought that we would have to ask the government's permission to do that never even occurred to me. That's how naive I was. So we're rocking along here. We've got these whatever, couple hundred families, and we're servicing them and raising chickens and butchering them and all. And suddenly, here come the inspectors, and well, you can't do that. You need a licensed facility. You need all this. And so we pushed back. We got our elected officials involved right away, and they said, well, you have to have a wall. You have to have a, enclosed structure. I said, well, why? They said, well, because the regulations say that if you have a window, it has to be screened, and that assumes you have a wall. I said, well, it doesn't say I have to have a wall. It says if I have to have a wall and a window in it, it's got to be screened. That makes sense. But I don't have a wall, and so you can see how we went around and around.
Yeah.
They said, well, obviously, when the regulations were written, it was assuming that you would have would have an enclosed structure, a wall, because they talked about screens and the windows. I said, but we don't have any windows. So, anyway, we won that. We won that round, and then they came and they what's it called? They confiscated, or they put police tape on a bunch of beef carcasses down at the slaughterhouse that we were selling to people, custom beef. The packages were marked not for sale, but the animals had our customers' names on them. They were sold live, and then they'd have them cut up the way they wanted, and then they'd pick up the meat at the custom slaughterhouse, neighborhood slaughterhouse, and the inspectors came in and they said, well, you can't do that anymore. I said, well, why? They said, well, because you're selling meat. I said, no, I'm selling a live animal, and they just happen to want to get them processed. And they said, well, if the price is based on a dead weight, like carcass weight, then it's an after death sale, no matter what arrangement you had prior to slaughter. Now, this was all sorts of gymnastics
Mhm.
around the code, but anyway, this was their position. And so, they demanded that, I give them the names of all my customers. I wouldn't do that. And basically parked on our front door for a week. And again, we got our legislators, our politicians involved. And for the liberals, I said, they're trying to close down an environmental farm. And for the conservatives, I said they're trying to close down a rural entrepreneur. And so, I played both of them,
Yeah.
and they all we've never had an elected official not come to bat for us in throughout our time. And make a long story short, they eventually backed off and said that it would be okay. That they took the police tape off. Well, then they kind of backed off, but I decided, I'm done with this. I don't want this to happen again. So I demanded, and our elected officials demanded a meeting with them to what we want to stop this from this is not fun. This is not fun when they come with a great big badge and tell you they're going to confiscate your product and put you out of business. And so we had a big meeting, and I said, so what would you do if you were in my shoes? The problem, Rod, with these bureaucrats is they leave their heart at the office. They come, they say, I'm just doing my job. That's what people said when they push the gas chamber buttons in
Yeah.
Germany at a time back. Don't ever justify heartless stupidity by saying I'm just doing my job. No, that doesn't fly. And so they squirmed. They hadn't been. They were used to reading people the riot act, and everybody bowed. Well, I wasn't going to bow, and so here they are. And I said, well, what would you do? And there was a 2 to 3 minute silence. They're in our living room. And we homeschool. We brought our kids in so that they would have. And I made a big point when the bureaucrats came in. I said, "Okay, we're going to see how the government helps us today, everybody. This is the way the government helps us." And so the kids were sitting there watching this, and I said, "What would you do?" And they didn't have an answer. They just sat there. And finally, about 3 minutes in, one of them said, "Well, I guess you could sell them live and then add shipping and handling as a service charge based on the dead weight, a shipping and handling charge." I said, "Hey, done. That works. That works. We've got success." So they left, and then for years, we don't do it anymore. But for several years after that, we sold our beef animals for $1 a head, 50 cents for a half, 25 cents for a quarter. But boy, that shipping and handling, I mean, that was deadly. And what's funny is in Virginia they collect sales tax on products. And so we'd been sending thousands of dollars in sales taxes to the state, but we don't collect sales tax on services. Well, shipping and handling is a service, not a product. So suddenly the state didn't get any tax money from us because we were offering a service and not a product, and we came out from under the sales tax requirements. So these are things that you encounter, and and you realize for all the things that that the government could do, for them to spend time trying to get in the middle of voluntary adults exercising freedom of choice for their own microbiome's provenance. That is way down the scale of what they ought to be doing, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we just came from, as I mentioned to you before we went on live here, we just came from the ostrich farm, where there are 30 to 60 RCMP, and I don't know how many CFIA agents, Canadian Food Inspection agents, running around trying to keep people from looking after their own ostriches, and it's ridiculous. But I wanted to specifically ask you the numbers. I don't want to use the wrong terminology here about the bacteria your chickens compared to the
Oh
store
yeah,
chickens.
yeah.
Yeah.
You said that. So yeah. So interestingly, when they told us, that our chicken processing, they said if one fly enters there, then the chicken is adulterated and not fit for human consumption. And so we had just had a lab test done on our chickens, and they measured for colony forming units of bacteria on the carcass on swab tests, and we measured about 150, and the ones in the store measured about 3,600. So we were 25 times cleaner than the chickens in the store, and ours had not even had any chlorine baths. The one in the store had up to 40 chlorine baths. And so I looked at them, the two guys, I showed them the report. And you would think if they were really interested in food safety or clean food, they would have said, "Hey, call Richmond, our state capital, and stop all the chicken processing. We gotta figure out how to do this as clean as they do it here at Polyface." But no, they said, "Well, this isn't all we're interested in." I said, "Oh, well, what else are you interested in?" "Well, uh, you have to have a bathroom." I said, "We're 30 feet from our back door. I've got two bathrooms in our house, two bathrooms over in Mom's house. She's about 60 feet away. Who needs a bathroom?" They said, "Well, you need 9 changing lockers for your employees." I said, "We don't have any employees." I mean, it's nonsense. It just goes on and on and on. It's completely nonsensical.
No. And back to the ostriches for a moment. The CFIA seem to say they're all concerned about avian flu, whatever. Not a bird has died of avian flu for almost a year,
Yeah, that's right.
and but they won't test them, the living birds, and they won't let anyone else test them. They won't even count them. The owners of the flock know that at least a couple of birds have died, but they can't get close enough to count them, and the CFIA will not even let them count the birds. So I know the ridiculous things go on and on.
Yes.
What One of the things too that I know our beef producers will be interested in, probably our dairy producers as well that are listening to this. Your farm, uh, you use the term cow days per acre,
Yeah.
and and you said sort of average out there is 80 cow days per acre, and your farm is close to 400. Do you want to flesh that uh, statement out, how
Yeah.
that works?
Yeah. So in a pasture situation, I mean, a lot of things that a farmer produces are very measurable. Apple orchards, bushels. Wheat, bushels. Um, Hay, you can count the bales, so many pounds, the tonnage, whatever. So most things that we do but it's very difficult to measure the production of a pasture. I mean, the cows are out there eating. Well, how much do you know how much are they eating? How do you measure the productivity of a pasture? So in the grass farming movement, the way that we measure pasture production is how many cows will a given acre support in a day, a month, a year, whatever. And so we look at cow days. So what one cow eats in a day is one cow day of food. If we took all of the food that you ate today, put it on a plate, that would be one person day of food. All right. And so if your acre supports three cows for a day, then that acre just produced 3 cow days worth of food. All right, worth of pasture. And so the cow day becomes a standard measurement within the industry. And so in our county here in Virginia, the average cow days per acre is 80. In other words, an acre will feed 80 cows for 1 day a year, or 1 cow for 80 days a year, or 2 cows for 40 days a year,
Yeah.
or 4 cows for 20 days a year. All right. But 80 cow days per acre, that's the average. And on our farm, we're averaging close to 400 cow days per acre. That's the difference. And so when people say, "Oh, if without chemicals we'd all starve and there just wouldn't be enough food and all that stuff," it's simply not true. And and so we call this, yeah, I've got this phrase that I use. It's called mob stocking, herbivorous solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. And so we move the cows. Again, we look at nature and we say, well, how does nature work? Well, in nature, look at the Serengeti, the wildebeest. They don't stay in one place. That they move. They move every day. They're constantly migrating. They're pushed by flies, by predators, by the monsoons, and by their own desire to get to fresh forage. And so we don't have wolves here, we don't have lions, and we don't have, but we do have electric fence, which allows us to confine the herd to one plate worth of food a day, if you will, and then we move them every day in a mob, and and that greatly stimulates the utilization of the forage, the efficiency of the utilization, and it allows us to rest most of the farm all the time. There's nobody there, and that grass is growing and getting tall, going through its juvenile blaze of growth period, so that you actually have way more forage produced than you would in a continuous grazing situation where the cows keep it grazed down tight all the time to the ground, and the grass essentially never gets out of first gear. By giving it rest, the grass can go through this blaze of growth period and get into overdrive.
That's a very good explanation of why that is an effective way of doing things. Um, well, I think I've just about used up the time you had graciously provided for this interview. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I ran across another passage that I have thought of from time to time. Proverbs 27:26 says, "The lambs are for thy clothing, the goats are the price of the field. You shall have goat's milk enough for your food, for the food for your household, and for the maintenance," says, "for your maidens." But that fruitfulness, the abundance, the productivity that is so obvious in the video footage of your farm, and you talk about your animals being happy,
Yep.
the people that work with you are happy, and even eventually, I think even the food inspection people will be happy once they figure out what's going on and how important it is to work with God in the way He created things. So,
Yeah.
um, so we'll just say for folks, if they want to, the quick place to go to learn more about your work and your farm is.
Yeah, it's Polyface Farms, Polyface, polyfacefarms.com. And that is a very eclectic website. It has everything from I do a blog, and I do a weekly podcast as well, and different things. And come for a visit. We do seminars. I speak. In fact, I just this week actually agreed to come to Canada. When is that? That's I'm trying to think. Let's see. Yeah, April 9th. I'm speaking at the annual convention of the Food Producers of Canada in Ottawa on April 9th. So I'm looking forward to come up there. I don't think I've been in Canada since COVID. And
Oh,
before COVID, I would go to Canada, 3 or 4, sometimes 5 times a year. So I'm looking forward to getting back up there and meeting all the wonderful Canadians.
well, during COVID, we had so much crazy stuff going on here. I'm
Oh
sure you
yeah,
had your share there, but you talked about the regulating backyard hockey rinks. We had young guys out in the fresh air playing hockey that got harassed and arrested by
sure.
police, overzealous police for
Yeah,
not wearing a mask and so on and
yeah,
so forth. So
yeah.
that particular phase is gone now, but
Yes.
some of the government overreach has,
Yeah.
we're still dealing with all the
Yes.
globalism and all that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
for your work on behalf of this planet, on behalf of the human race, and good, sound agricultural techniques. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and wish you all success in the future. God bless you.
Thank you. You too. And thank you for having me. It's been a real privilege. Thank you.
Okay. God bless. Bye bye.